Hello, Internet. Hello, everybody out there. I hope that everyone can see me and hear me today. I hope everyone's doing well and had a great weekend, and all things considered, are staying positive and busy and doing what you need to do. We're back here on Ed Video's Open Circuit. Now, our new format is Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. To be aware for our international viewers, which occasionally there are. I hope people have been watching, have been enjoying the format of this show, talking with artists each day about their work, but more importantly about their ideas and their motivation. Basically, trying to get them to share their secrets of what they do and how they do it. That music you just heard in the intro video is actually a recent album, a recent song by today's guest, who's a Guelph artist, Brian Schirk, who I'll introduce properly in a moment. And normally, also, my co-host and co-producer Edie is right here. She's catching up on her homework today, but I think she'll be back on Thursday, I'm hoping. Let's take a look here. So we'll have our video game review back when is possible, hopefully on Thursday. But we do have some really exciting upcoming guests, a few with confirmed dates, and a few more that I've been in chats with and we're ready to have on the show, but we just have to figure out the exact date when that makes sense. But we do know Thursday's guest is someone I'm really excited to speak to. She's a artist named Phan Ling Xuan, and she lives just outside of Guelph. And there's so much to talk to Phan Ling about, because she does a lot of different things. She makes some incredible sculptural work, some incredible 2D works. She also runs a residency just outside of Guelph called Lore, Lore residency, if you want to look that up. And she also works for the Guelph Arts Council, so she knows a lot about what's going on in this area around Guelph. So lots to chat about. And today, I think, Phan Ling and I were supposed to arrive in Athens, Greece, to work on an art fair there. That's obviously been postponed until next year, but I believe on Thursday when she's on, the platform's project art fair has an incredible online version of it. I've seen some pretty bad versions of online art fairs, but this one's really great that my friend Artemis, who organizes the fair, has put together. Maybe we'll take a little look at that. Then next week on Tuesday, 1 week from today, we have an incredible guest I'm super excited to speak with. His name is Andrew McLuhan. He's going to join us from where he lives in Prince Edward County. Andrew McLuhan is the grandson of the famous media theorist from Canada, Marshall McLuhan. Andrew's also the son of Eric McLuhan, who worked very closely with Marshall. And now Andrew has taken the reins and he's set up something called the McLuhan Institute. He runs that from nearby where he lives, and he is the chief archivist, I suppose, of the family's legacy. There's thousands of artifacts in there, and Andrew spends as much time as he's able to pour through all these books and artifacts, and he's like a forensic expert, figuring out his grandfather and his father's legacy and kind of creating his own legacy in doing so. So I'm very excited to speak to Andrew. He's got amazing ideas about what he's involved with, and in particular, I'm curious about how he's thinking about translating these ideas that are now 30, 40, 50 years old into today's times, where they're still extremely relevant, maybe even more so now. They potentially even make more sense. So I'm very excited to speak to Andrew. So thanks both to Andrew and Phan Ling for agreeing to be on Open Circuit with me. So check back Thursday and a week from today, Tuesday. So now, I think we're going to try to find today's guest. His name is Brian Schirk. I've known him for quite a long time, maybe since I moved to Guelph, pretty much, nearly 15 years. He's a well-known person in town because he's involved in a lot of things, his own projects, and a lot of collaborative projects as well. He's an artist, a musician, he's a producer, an audio engineer, and a community organizer. He's an OG, as we say here. I'd like to talk to him about that as well. And he's participated in a lot of exhibitions and events, both here in Guelph and in Toronto and elsewhere too, in many different ways. Mostly, as we do, we talk about sort of our guests' history, where they got to today, but we like to focus on their most recent work. For Brian, that would be a new website called loveaffair.info. That's a hell of a good URL. Love Affair has also been helping out Open Circuit by rebroadcasting, embedding these episodes as well. So lots to talk about with Brian. Let's see if we can find Brian on the video phone. Let's see. Hello. Oh, hi, Brian. Are you there?
Hey, Scott.
Hey, thanks so much, first of all, for taking the time, sort of last minute as well, to be on Open Circuit. Super excited to talk to you about so many things today.
My pleasure. The excitement's mutual.
Good. Well, before we get going, I always like to ask the guests, where are you? Sort of what are you doing day to day? Where are you at right now, Brian?
I'm just sitting in my partner and I's living room, our little jungle, what we have going on right now. Finished broadcasting on my show about an hour and a half ago now. Took a little break for lunch. Just hanging out now. Looking forward to chatting.
That's good. I'm glad you can do this today. Before we get going, I always ask our guests, like, what I don't know why, but what are some of your really early memories of in your case, music or art or creative endeavors? Is there one that kind of sticks as like this little like nudge that pushed you into doing the things that you do today?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a loaded question with me. My parents were both people who were like heavily involved in sort of the arts community in Guelph in their time. My dad was a DJ at CFRU for a number of years, a concert promoter. Both my parents ran an after-hours nightclub downtown Guelph for a period of time in the 80s. And so I was, being the first of myself and my sister, my parents sort of regarded me as a little bit of a science experiment. So I was exposed to a lot of music and sort of video and things that I don't think many other kids my age had been exposed to. So my first real musical memory is actually of the first time I successfully tied my shoe. I tied my shoe. My dad and I were singing Blue Moon by the Marcells, which was it's weird, always stuck in my head. And then our house just kind of always had music on. We quite literally always had music playing. Everything from like Eno to Joy Division to 10cc, a lot of the old Motown soul stuff. Little Richard, we were huge Little Richard fans. Massive blow, losing the queen of rock and roll.
Yes.
But yeah, so music has always been a very, very big part of my life, and my family's life. And I think playing in bands and stuff is something my dad always wanted to do, but never really had the opportunity. He mostly just worked as like a sound guy, touring with bands once in a while, and doing concert promotion. So they were really supportive of me when I was young and decided I wanted to start playing metalcore. Became the screamer in a metalcore band at 13, and that was when I first like fell in love with playing live music. Prior to that, I had done quite a bit of theater. I played Ralphie in A Christmas Story at the Guelph Little Theater in 2001.
I can picture that all too easily for some reason if you had the right glasses.
Yeah, exactly. Me and my legendary official Red Ryder range model air rifle with a compass and a thing that tells time in the stock. So moved from theater into live music, and at the time it was really like the tail end of I think kids like getting together and playing instruments terribly in their parents' basement. Um, I haven't really seen that much. All my younger cousins, we have a massive family. They're all really into like Fruity Loops and virtual DJ and stuff like that. And there doesn't seem to be too much of that, like getting together and playing crappy, scrappy punk music. Um, and we did that quite a bit. And so it was like this, yeah, played in those bands, toured in those bands, and got really into the like performative aspect of metal, and how people can be one person on stage and then you go talk to them at the merch table and they're like the nicest person in the world. And that dynamic just really blew my mind, and got me started with um, just reaching out to musicians that I liked, um, to ask questions or talk. And yeah, when I was 14, actually, I did my first ever event, which was for Ed Video. It was a fundraiser for Ed Video. It was myself and Liz's son, Steve Dusome. It was right after Ed Video had to move out of the old space on Wyndham Street. And we were raising funds, I think, to move to Baker. And Steve and I put together a show, and I rented the Masonic Hall from my dad, and the lodge.
Okay, wait. Okay? This isn't. I remember there's an infamous event with Steve before then, where in his teenage wisdom, he got people to line up in front of Wyndham, and it kind of tipped off the local bylaw officers that there was something there. But then, there's another one, and I think this is the one you're talking about. Is shortly after I started working there, I suppose. And originally, did we have the restaurant booked at the Travel Lodge, like the Indian
That's right.
buffet? And
That's right.
and then they kicked us out like an hour before the show. They're like,
That's
no
exactly right.
way. And you or somebody or Liz or somebody pulled in a favor and got the lodge at the last moment. It was you.
Me.
That was a wild night, and it worked. I
It
couldn't
worked.
believe it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the moment I standing in that room like with Steve at the back of the room, and knowing that we had gotten our friends to drive down from London and Woodstock and you know Milton, and kids came from all over Ontario, kids who had nothing to do with that video came to like give their money and support it, and they were really stoked. And all we did was like make a couple of posts on MySpace about it, and that really just kind of blew my mind and got me really interested in the idea of like community organization and direct action, um, and all that. Yeah, and then running away from home and living with the anarchists for a while too. That really solidified all those ideas for me.
Well, I think they'd be a good influence in your path to open your mind to what's possible. I mean, you grew up in Guelph. Like, what do you think? Before we move on to your latest project, the Acid Panel, what do you think it is about Guelph where it's just so much music? Like maybe that's waning a tiny bit, but I mean, what do you think is that dynamic that makes that happen?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Guelph has always sort of been looking at the history of Guelph. It's always been a place that uh, things you wouldn't expect to happen in a town of its size like happen. I remember once getting into an argument with a woman when I worked at La Hacienda on Queen Street West in Toronto, who was adamant that there could not be an arts or music scene in Guelph because her husband had gone to the OAC.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my husband went to the Ontario Agricultural College. It's just a farm town. They don't have arts in Guelph, and that's not the thing at all. And I think a lot of that has to just do with sort of for a long time houses were pretty cheap here, and there was a pretty solid artists community, and we do have a pretty good reputation of being a city that does support artists. I use the word reputation very strongly there.
We can rest on our laurels for decades, I think.
Exactly, but yeah, I think that there is sort of we do value that, and I think that whether that perceived value has like waned recently is one thing, but yeah, I think it's just it's the kind of place that people come to because they hear that it's an easy place to make things or like do what like you want to do. And I find that one of the most important things about making work is like having the space and time to do it. And when you live in a place like Toronto, for example, you know, since 2013, and even then it was almost impossible to have a part-time job and pay your rent and still have a studio and, you know, more so time to work in that studio. Um, I've found Guelph isn't so much that like trading the same $10 bill with your friends every weekday, going from one show to the next, you know, like um, there is actually still time and space to make new work here. And I think that's something that people who make art value a lot, and so they seek it out. And I'd love to see that be reflected more in, you know, municipal policies like the noise bylaw and things like that. But that's another conversation, I'm sure.
Yes, we could go on for days about that. Perhaps I've thought a lot about it. That dynamic. Yeah, I mean, I think I have this theory. It's not really my theory. I kind of heard it from a local author and artist, David J. Knight, and he was like, "Well, it's just in Guelph's DNA because it was established by John Galt, who was a colonist, but as far as colonists go, like kind of a benevolent one. He was a romantic poet and a playwright and whatnot.
Yep.
So he's like, it's just like from the beginning that it's you know, meant to be that if your city was established in 1827 by a poet, why wouldn't that some semblance of that remain through the centuries? You know, but
Absolutely.
yeah.
And that is, it is very true. Like Galt was a person who was so incredibly hard-headed and did not have much respect for the crown. And he, you know, he was a DIY guy. Like really, he was. He from the first tree that was cut down in this area, he called it a city. It was didn't have any of the things that a city needs to have. We had 11 mill seats, which was like that was the big deal. But yeah, Guelph was terrible for the people who lived here at the very beginning. Like you had to go to either Breslau or Dundas to get like a bag of flour. Like you'd have to take 2 bags of grain, which would be a 4-day trip back and forth. It's insane. So it was very much, there is like that spirit of determination and like making things difficult for yourself, and they don't necessarily have to be. And when somebody says, hey, you know, it doesn't have to be this hard, you go, screw you. Yes, it does. To prove a point.
Yeah.
And,
Well, I mean, Galt was even thrown in prison when he went back to England. He was only here for like 2 years, but because he was like, you know, not towing the line of what was it called? The Canada? No, the
Canada Company.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're like, you were too lenient. You gave people too many loans. And they threw him in prison for like a few years because of that, too. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, we could talk about who is John Galt for days, but I'm trying to get to back to you.
Actually, just quick plug.
Yeah.
If anyone is interested in hearing more about John Galt and the history of Guelph, I have a podcast called Guelph: A Royal History, and there's 3 episodes available on whatever podcasting platform you listen to.
Oh, really? That's fascinating. What's it called again? Guelph Royal History?
Guelph: A Royal History.
A Royal History. Oh, very cool. Okay. Well, let's talk about some other audio things. In particular, your very latest project. We heard one of the tracks from it in the opening. It's called the Acid Panel, and here's a screenshot. Your URL is just theacidpanel.com. It goes right to your Bandcamp. I was listening to it last night and this morning. Very beautiful stuff. Tell us a little bit about this latest project. You know, sort of how this came to be out of your more screamcore, emo, you know, hardcore background. This is pretty opposite to that. What is this?
So the Acid Panel was a project that I started a few years ago now, when I really started to um, get a little bit deeper into my study of synthesis. So you mentioned earlier that I'm an audio engineer. I went to school for audio engineering. The reason I chose that was because of my interest in sound design, which I've had since I was a kid. My dad bought me my first synthesizer when I was 15, and I got my first home recording studio at 12, which was all old analog equipment, barely worked, but it was enough for me to learn how to make tape loops. And I used to make silly little recordings of like Brian Eno Warship ambient music, to quell my anxiety at bedtime and things like that. And so my original like music making, uh, even before collaborating in like metal bands and stuff, was almost always just imitating Brian Eno making ambient music. Um, and so that's always just been sort of something that was on the back burner for me for many years. It was something I was very interested in, but I had more fun touring in stinky vans with stinky dudes and playing in stinky venues and all. It was just more fun for me to do that stuff than really focus on making music on my own. And I when I moved back to Guelph in 2015 from Toronto, I started to dedicate a lot of time to those interests. And so I started working more closely with MaxMSP, which is a programming language for digital sound processing and video processing as well. And figuring out ways to make music with data, which is something that always fascinated me. So the Acid Panel is named the Acid Panel because of a synthesizer that was made by Don Buchla for the San Francisco Tape Music Society in the 1960s. Mm-hmm. And there was, the synth is actually at Berkeley now, I believe. But there is, in the center of the synth, one of the oscillator panels was painted red. And the story surrounding it is that Don Buchla had actually dipped that panel in liquid LSD before putting it on the synthesizer. So if you were sitting there playing this Buchla, you could, take a lick and, get an extra bit of boost of inspiration or whatever. So that Buchla has actually since released a line of synthesizers recently called the Red Panel series, which is affordable, sort of in the same vein as Moog's Mother series of synthesizers. But yeah, I got really into this sort of idea of West Coast synthesis, which was, as opposed to East Coast synthesis, which is heavily based around like exactly like synthesis as, like, if you think about what the term synthesis means, like to synthesize something, like to recreate something in an artificial way, which is applicable to the East Coast style of electronic music. It was the West Coast style of electronic music that like really, really heavily rejected the term synthesizer, because West Coast synth philosophy was heavily about stepping outside of the bounds of like Western music and conservatism when it comes to like what music should be and what is and isn't music. So they didn't want to use a black and white keyboard because that would just make you play the same things over and over again. And so started really getting into working with modular synthesizers and data sets, and figuring out how I could use data sets to control different aspects of a synthesizer over time to create sort of soundscapes that were representative of the data that I was using to create them. And for me, that came mostly in the shape of like the first Acid Panel album was all data streams and data sets that I had collected from different hiking trails around Guelph, and a friend of mine who works up at the Turfgrass Institute who had been forwarding me weather data from their many instruments they use to collect data up there. And so I would take these streams and run them through MaxMSP and Pure Data to create these really big, lush soundscapes. And they would different, like if it was rainy, there'd be more white noise, or if the sky was very clear, you would have these like really beautiful sort of like C major chords coming in, and yeah, it was really interesting kind of working with that, because it was I felt like I was making music that doesn't really exist. And then I got really into this whole idea of like generative music and what it means to be a musician. Like, if I write a computer program that makes beautiful music and will never stop unless I stop it, like, is it still me? Is that still my music? And so the acid panel is really, it's an exploration of that grew out of my own like need for um, like auditory stimulus, I guess, be like a good way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah. Let's take a look at video for one of Acid Panel's songs. It's called "Even Gone." Very beautiful song and videos. Give our viewers a taste of what you're what you're describing right now.
cool.
Let's take a look. We'll just watch maybe 1 or 2 minutes, and I'll come back to you, and we'll keep chatting about things.
Sounds good.
Wow, that's so gorgeous. I didn't want to cut away from it. Just such a beautiful song and visuals to go along with it. Let's talk a little bit more, Brian, about your ideas around collaboration. I mean, you're a very gregarious guy. Work with a lot of people. Always been one of these people ready to jump in anything that needs people need help with in Guelph and be really involved, but also you're very like solitary in a lot of your creative pursuits as well. And I'm kind of curious about how you're thinking about that as, in particular. What you're just talking about is you're sort of like now also collaborating with machines and algorithms and equipment. And, how is that sort of altering, you touched on it, but how's that like more directly altering what you're doing with your music projects?
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's been something that I've been thinking about for quite a long time. As I mentioned sort of earlier as well, with like all my younger cousins who play music, they do it. It's all a solitary thing for them now too. Um, and yeah, I've been thinking a lot about um, exactly that, like collaboration and what it means to collaborate. And especially now, given our current situation, I think this is like even more important to think about. And I value collaboration like very highly, because when you collaborate with people, you expose yourself to ideas that you wouldn't have come to on your own. And I think that's an incredibly important part of making any work at all. Um, and so I think collaboration is extremely, extremely important. And I'm not sure that I would be able to make anything if I didn't have that luxury or privilege. Um, the thing is that I've had to work on um, figuring out ways to collaborate in ways that work for me. I have bipolar disorder, which affects my ability to, um, be sort of consistent when it comes to touring in bands, or playing and meeting the expectations of my peers at times. Um, and so that's something that really comes into it for me quite a bit. And then also the fact that, you know, it's not always easy to find people who are looking to do or interested in doing the same things that you're doing. So I've been figuring out different ways to create collaborative environments for myself that perform those functions of like inspiring me and um, making me ask questions or think of things in ways that I wouldn't have thought of them. But I've been doing that mostly with probability at this point. And so taking, little tiny pieces of sound that work together, whether it's a melody or a bass line or a drum beat or a little piece of speech or vocal hook or whatever, and organizing them into basically blocks so that I know, okay, these all sound good together. And then using probability, I will uh, create a sequence where they shift between each other in ways that um, like sound right, but don't ever happen exactly the same. And when you do that, especially if it's a song that you've been working on for a while and you just dissect it into little parts and you throw them into like a probability machine, basically, you end up with weird combinations of notes and melodies and different things happening that you wouldn't have done if you sat down at a piano. Um, and that's something that I'm like just super fascinated by. And so creating these environments where stuff just kind of goes nuts. Um, and it when I think about what like people look for at say a live music event, it's like that engagement, like that this is something that like you are experiencing right now, and it's in that moment, and outside of that moment it doesn't exist. And in DJ culture, this is a huge thing, especially dance music DJ culture. One of the most common things, if you follow any of the subreddits like our house or whatever, one of the most common types of posts you see, it'll say track ID, and it'll be some crappy grainy cell phone video that somebody took at a rave of like a DJ playing something. And the thing is, there is no track ID for it, because it's like five different things all playing at once in this weird way that it just happened to be that way, and it sounds amazing, but that moment is fleeting, and once it's done, it's gone.
Yes.
um,
Yeah, I was reading oddly on the weekend for some reason. As I do, I go down on these rabbit holes on Wikipedia, and I was reading a lot about like the history of industrial music and Skinny Puppy and these kind of West Coast Canadian industrial bands, and it really occurred to me like they said basically how they got anything done at all is they would agree to meet at a time. They would hook up their machines together so they're synced. They would get high, and then they would just record everything. And it really occurred to me, I was like, well, that makes sense when you're dealing with drum machines and synthesizers, whatnot, that can sync together just by plugging a cable between them. Like that's a really pragmatic way to get content done. And it's like that's why you always hear about these side projects and blah blah blah, and there's a little bit dictated by the nature of the machines that they're working with, where like they're collaborators. Like collaborating in different ways is a little bit more like dating, because it's about, as you're talking about, it's like, you got to get along with the people, but in an industrial music sense, it's sort of like, well, the machines just inherently get along, like they have to.
exactly. And we're just the babysitters, like you know. And that's I find that stuff to be really fascinating. And so, yeah, like the whole collaboration thing has been a big thing. And so, yeah, creating these environments and something, I guess, sort of what I'm the main thing behind all of this really comes down to like um, a good way, I guess, to put it into perspective would be exactly what you're just talking about. So what you were referring to is a type of technology called MIDI 1.0 specifically. 2.0 is coming out soon, and I am extremely excited about that.
It's
Um,
long overdue. It's been 40
yes,
years since an update.
exactly. But if you listen to, say, like Kraftwerk albums, rest in peace,
Mm-hmm.
Florian, from like prior to the 80s. So the stuff from the 70s, like Radioactivity, Autobahn, all of that stuff was done prior to MIDI technology. And so it's a little bit out of sync and it does sound human, even though it's extremely robotic. And 1981, I believe, Naughty Boys by YMO was released, which is the first album ever to use MIDI. It was completely paid for by Roland, basically as an advertisement for their new technology, MIDI. So they brought Yellow Magic Orchestra, Hiromi Hosono, Ryuichi Sakamoto, and the rest of the band in. I can't think of the other guy's name, but the rest of the band in. And they gave them this equipment that synced together. And they spent the rest of the time in the studio trying to humanize those machines. And so I love this idea of like working with the technology that we have available to us, but trying our best to stop it from sounding like technology.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean that's always I'm having, as I mentioned at the onset of the show, Andrew McLuhan will be here a week from right now, and one of my favorite McLuhan ideas is that when a new technology arises, people's first instinct is to try to make it do the job of the previous technology instead of using it for what it's good for, and I mean this is illustrated again in many conversations I've had with a lot of people, particularly in the arts, who their IRL activities have been canceled and they want to figure out how to switch it to online, but as like the perfect way to replicate an in real life experience online. And it's sort of like, well, it's a flawed basis to think of because you just have to use it for what it's good for.
Exactly. And frankly, in that exact same conversation, like the what like we shouldn't we talked about this briefly before we started the episode, but this idea of sort of uh, like trying to replace exactly what you mean, like replace our normal daily social interactions and things with the internet. And I think that is exactly the wrong way to look at it. We should use the internet in the way that we know the internet works. Um, I know this is something sort of I think about quite a bit, but one of the biggest markets for us as artists is nostalgia. We want to, if you really want to get people to notice or care about your stuff, you want to create a sort of sense of nostalgia around it. um, Either something that they didn't have access to or that they miss having access to. And so there are things that I know I'm nostalgic for, which are like silly, like early chat rooms and forums and things on like Web 1.0 and Geo. um, Geez, I can't even think of it right now. It was Geo. What was that?
GeoCities.
GeoCities. Thank you. I wanted to say GeoSites, but I knew that was wrong. But GeoCities and like Something Awful and Still Post and SLSK and all of these other weird little communities, and even MSN and AOL, ICQ. These things were things that, like, if you were to sit down at a computer with Windows 98 on it and try to log into ICQ today, you would be so frustrated with the like amount of time it takes you to do that, and like login screens and all that stuff. We take these things for granted now that we can just sign into Google. But I feel like there's some inherent value in like performing those steps, going through that work to gain access to something. Um, it like validates you once you get to that other side of that wall, whether it's a really terrible UI on like a form fill out or something. But trying to get back to those sorts of things and cater to them, but figure out how to apply some of the things that we have today that we didn't have then, like YouTube, and online streaming and high quality and all these things didn't exist then. So how can we incorporate that into the same sort of framework while maintaining that sense of nostalgia, but also actually providing like a really constructive space to like share ideas and work on things outside of worrying about losing your IP or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know, when I was a kid using SLSK, like I could I could make music in Acid Pro with my Vengeance, loop CDs and upload it to SoulSeek, and I never ever had to worry about, you know, down the line if I want to release this music, like what are the legal, repercussions of that if I've uploaded it to this program or this website. Whereas now, if you've uploaded an image to Instagram, like you can't even legally print that and sell it as your own. Like they can come down on you for that if they wanted to because it's in their terms of service. So a lot of the internet, I think, has just become so mystified behind terms of service that we've kind of lost touch of those like more tactile internet experiences, which I think are really what the internet is good at and what we should be using it for.
Yeah, I hear you on that for sure. Just just over to the side, I've got a Commodore 64. I'm gonna teach Edie how to use it. Just as an educational thing to understand that machines are not as tethered, and that machines ought to be more controllable, customizable. But like you say, like that comes with a bit of work too. Like you have to have a much stronger understanding of what the machine does, what it's its inherent bones of how it works.
Exactly.
But tell me a bit. Let's get going about what you are doing with our highly tethered technology with your latest project. I mentioned at the start of the show for our viewers. It's loveaffair.info. I mean, how are you? First of all, like we were talking about collaboration, but who before we get going on the ideas behind it, who are you collaborating with for this?
Yeah. So Love Affair, prior to the website and everything, Love Affair grew out of a few parties that my friend Rigel, who also lives in Guelph, Rigel Rosansky, and I threw. When I first moved back to Guelph back in 2015, we organized 3 sound system raves where we set up a big sound system. We went out to the first one was underneath the Hanlon, the second underneath the old culvert on Old Silver Creek Road, and then the third one out by Victoria, by like the turf lands. And we would take out a sound system at 11:30, 10 p.m. We would text about 15 people with the GPS coordinates where to find us, which would usually be about a half kilometer away from the actual site of the event. Rigel and I would organize these things. We'd bring DJs in, pay people, and people would just kind of come in and party, and it worked. And we did that because we felt that there was a sort of void at the time in the Guelph artistic community as far as events went for that type of space. Um, if you wanted to go to a dance party, you basically had to go to the E-bar on very specific nights of the month in order to have that type of experience. And it's something that a lot of people in town really wanted. So we decided just to go for it. And so we threw a few sound systems and they went off without a hitch. We never had issues with police. Everybody was totally cool. We didn't have any issues with like the people who showed up. And so we wanted to sort of, we started talking about how to legitimize this while also sort of incentivizing like direct action. So for like lack of a better term, we kind of wanted to like trick people into community involvement. Like you would come to this rave and you would leave a volunteer, not for us, but like for Arch or for Ed Video or for any of the other amazing organizations in Guelph, CFRU, what have you, and sort of just like creating that space that really encouraged that while also just being a hell of a lot of fun. Um, and so we thought for a few good months, Rigel and I would spend every Tuesday about 8 hours to 12 hours every single Tuesday sitting down, working on, okay, what does this look like? how do we hold ourselves accountable? How do we hold the organization accountable? Um, what does what does a safe event look like? What does that mean? Like, how do you be inclusive? Like, we tried to tackle all of these ideas, and yeah, so really, what it came down to for the two of us was that you know we're both young white guys. We've got a hell of a lot of privilege that most people don't have. We have a much quicker route to this platform that a lot of people don't have. So why don't we create this organization as a jumping off point for people who don't have that same head start that we do? Um, and so that really came down to, like, yeah, just essentially creating this space, and um, that's kind of where I'm at now. Is like I built this space, and now the goal is really just to see if, like, people, if this is something people would like to have in their community or as a part of their community, and if so, we hope to get people involved and have them sort of dictate what Love Affair should be, because the idea was mostly to exemplify alternative organizational structures. Things don't always have to look like this. We wanted to do an organization that looked like this.
Well, you've got some good structure in place, and it's all live and everything. You're building up schedule. We'll take a look right now at what that looks like. Loveaffair.info. I mean, so far, you have a morning show,
Mhm.
but also a few music shows. It's kind of building up in the last few weeks, and
Yeah.
that's amazing. How do you want to keep growing it? Like, do you want to take it into a 24-hour a day thing, or
Yeah.
heavy scheduling? Yeah, what would be your dream as far as how it could build up to something like that?
So this really, I mean, I'm taking like very heavy inspiration from a couple of websites, mostly NTS.live, which is an incredible internet radio station. They have some just unreal programming and content, just really, really, really well done, well curated stuff. And then there's another wonderful little website, internet radio station in Montreal called Antennas, which, if you're not familiar with, you should pull up that web page because it is incredible. It's like letter N, numerical 10.as. Um, and so we took a lot of, and this actually will get right back to what I was talking about earlier with the Web 1.0 stuff. But these are the sort of sites that I drew a lot of inspiration from. And also, like, Weird Canada, which was and is an incredible organization started by a few wonderful people, like Marie and Aaron and Jesse. And uh, the idea of that was really just to connect the weirdo community throughout Canada. And so I'd like to really think of Love Affair as like an open source, public access media platform for the greater Canadian creative community. Um, and so if there's something that somebody wants to prop up, like if they're really stoked on their friend's record and nobody's really paying any attention to it, and they have a platform to share that record with more people, then this is exactly what Love Affair is for. So the goal is, once we have the radio station all set up, to create, again, like a forum and a chat space and a marketplace, so that a distro, so that people could sell their albums um, online in a centralized place, so that we can all access it. There'll be like an archive of all of the live shows, and so yeah, from
So,
here,
Brian, how are you open to people trying to contacting you to get involved?
yes,
Like, you're open to taking in new content if people are have things to offer like that?
yes, we are openly looking for it, and you can get in touch either with me directly at brian@loveaffair.info, or we actually also have contribute@loveaffair.info, which is our email for, like, if you'd like to get in touch regarding contribution. Um, and we also have our GitHub, uh, which has every single piece of information that has ever been written about us or what we're doing or what our plan is all available on our GitHub. Um, and I guess it's worth mentioning, a big part of this entire organization uh, relies heavily on like demystification of technology, and so we chose GitHub, which is it's a website which hosts code. It's what coders use to communicate with each other, where they are on a project, um, what needs to be fixed in something, and what where they're planning to go, and all of that stuff. So it's a really wonderful way to sort of track your progress in a project, and we wanted to sort of apply a lot of the same structures that exist within the software development world, which are very decentralized, to an event organization and like this kind of thing. So yeah, we are very, very much looking for open participation and collaboration. And the idea is that if there is something that you personally or any of the viewers might um, see that they would like to change about it, or that they would think would be very cool to see on the site, um, it's it's not me that makes that decision. It's the organization, and because the organization at the moment is made up of about 5 people. It's myself, Alexander Hart, Rigel Brzezinski, Versa, actually have been involved as well. Alex and Monika, and yeah, who else? There's a few other people. Julia Dickens is doing some stuff from Toronto. John Pritchard is doing some stuff. We're hosting Open Circuit. Um, so yeah, we're really, really hoping that more people see this, get involved, and if they have a podcast that they've made, or they've always wanted to tell the world about their favorite musician or whatever, even if it's just one episode, that's what we're looking for. And we'd like to host it on the site, archive it, have it available, and throw it in rotation. And ideally, we will be a 24/7 live, um, completely original content radio station.
That's amazing how it's such a collaborative effort, and that it's possible using GitHub and to make it perhaps even more than democratic, like egalitarian, as far as
Yes.
there's no real structure and people can contribute. Um, I mean, what if you could sort of shoulder tap people? Like, what other forms do you think might be interesting to use this concept for? Like, do you have dreams about as far as like really unusual or experimental things, or things that are unusual to see streaming? What would you love to see it kind of define itself as?
Yeah. So yeah, I guess really, I because it's so open ended, I really love the idea of like an open source media platform. And so I guess that's what I would like to see it grow into. And as far as like kind of weird stuff, I would love to have a few different channels. And one of the projects that I'm working on now, as I mentioned earlier about the generative music thing, NTS have a different what they call infinite mixtapes, which are essentially just playlists that go on and go on. And I love that idea, but I'm more interested in like labeling it like a mood, or like a thing that you want to do, and creating like a generative music piece that will never play the same thing over and would just play infinitely. Um, so things like that, having a place to sort of showcase these types of things that you don't always see, even in like art galleries, you don't get to experience them for that long. Generative music that usually soundtracks an installation or something would be something you might get to listen to for the 10 minutes that you're in the space. So, yeah, really thinking about it as if it were like a physical venue. What types of things would you like to see in a physical venue? And so that would be like awesome visuals and really cool environs, and installations and lights and lasers, and spectacle and good performance. And I think working within the technology that we have and the limitations that we have right now, especially with the current situation, um, how can we recreate those feelings in a way that isn't like it's a new thing? And so something to aspire to for me is like what Eden Segal Grossman is working on, the Minecraft festivals, just things like that. You know, integrating technology that allows us to be closer to each other, into our lives in ways to provide us with those like feelings that we need of uh, excitement and spectacle and being at a show and all that. So that's really what we want to do. So I'd like eventually to get into video broadcasting. You and I have spoken a little bit about OTA, amateur television broadcasting, which is becoming a reality here in Canada. Um,
Well,
so that's
one dynamic that is just hilarious is essentially this technology that I'm using right now and that you're using. It's the same as the major corporate broadcasters in the world who've all moved into this online format and are using the same websites and the same kind of basic technology to get their stories out. So I mean, I think that's super exciting. I mean, I was talking with some of my contemporaries are more my age. I went to college with 20, 25 years ago, and I was like, if this existed then, like, this is all we would do. Like, this would be our recording deck, is just doing video and things live, and it just gets recorded, and, you know, it's extremely exciting. But, like, how are you thinking about that as sort of like you know, it's like having incredible power, potential of incredible power, um, but it's also like kind of like nerve wracking in a little bit of a way too to put your content out there and to do, especially doing things live. You know, it's sort of this, as I say, sometimes everything you say and do will be recorded forever. You know, that's an odd onus to take on
yeah.
as a person, you know, as an amateur. So, you know, what are you thinking about, like some of the exciting aspects of what is possible online? But then, you know, we're talking about nostalgia before, and but into some of your interests in actually going to do old school, like over the air broadcasting as well.
Hmm. Um, I think it's sort of like a little bit getting back to the nostalgia. I think that um, in order to sort of convince people of the value of that type of media, again, it would heavily rely on nostalgia as a way of proving its worth, or at least getting people interested enough in checking it out. Um, but given that, yeah, I mean, for me, I would love to see like a municipal public access like television station or broadcasting station, um, that had, maybe, I don't know, 5 kilometer radius or something small, but over the air, that would service a community, and that would like get back to those, like, I don't know, do you make friggin' wood burnt signs in your garage? Like, I'll make you a 30-second plug, like, broadcasting things like that. I've been thinking of ways sort of to, because over the last 25 years, we've all, the community thing with internet and everything, we kind of go out this way. How can we use that technology to sort of make us all come back this way again, in our own communities where we live, like our neighborhoods and the apartment buildings and complexes that we live in? How can we um, kind of incentivize that collectivity, I guess? And so that's something that's really where I'd love to see the station go. And in my mind, that requires like, things like the max headroom hack back in the day, right? Where you just take over some airwave for a little bit and bob your head around, say gibberish through a talk box. But like that kind of thing, it like gets people notice that sort of stuff. And so, like what would be the equivalent of the max headroom hijack today? How would we go about that sort of thing? So yeah, that is something I would love to see Love Affair kind of grow into. Really, just like a big, like an open source public access network that isn't owned by any one person, and actually like any money that comes into it is used in a way that benefits the people involved, and like the people involved with the people involved, and just keep it moving out, and make Rogers look like the jerks that they are.
Wow, it sounds like you want to be like the contemporary version of Moses Neimer. Set up this
Hey,
media conglomerate across different formats, but to just, you know, spread good ideas to your community and beyond. That's awesome though, and it's exciting. I mean, here that video I started researching a few months ago about amateur radio, and it blew my mind about what that's about today. I mean, I always pictured it as like some old guy in his basement with like $50,000 of equipment and giant antennas. He's like hiding from his family to talk with other guys in basements or whatever. But I realized like no, like you can buy one of these sets on Amazon for like $40,
Yeah,
and you take a course, and there's actually government incentives right now. They'll pay for it. You don't have to pay anything. It's free to do it, to take the classes. They'll give you money to do this because they have a motivation to keep that alive, as no
yeah,
younger people are doing it, as an emergency response system if the internet goes down. And
oh,
one
very
other
cool.
hilarious part of it is if you get your license, which isn't hard to do, you can get a customized license plate for your car that's your amateur radio call sign. And in the case of an emergency, police will see that and they'll let you do whatever you want. How cool would that be? Just drive around
Hey, man.
like a
I,
idiot, with your amateur license plate number there.
I have always been fascinated by like ham radio. My dad, you know, the guy that's got the giant dish when you're driving towards like Cambridge down or towards Kitchener, like if you take
Yes.
27. Yeah,
Yes.
okay. Yeah. So, or 24. Yeah. That guy is a ham radio enthusiast, and he is the guy you described earlier in his basement hiding from his family with the wires everywhere. But my dad put in a patio door for him or something like that years and years ago, and I remember him taking me in there, and it was like, what? There was an episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark that was about that same thing, where a guy was contacting aliens on his ham radio, and yeah, that idea of just like having the ability to broadcast like that has always been fascinating for me. Something I didn't mention earlier, I guess, is my dad actually went to school for radio and television broadcasting back in the '80s at Conestoga. Um, so that was always a big something that's influenced me big time. Is like, um, yeah, like being just familiar with the technology and understanding that like a lot of this stuff, like it's really not hard to do. Um, the guy who gave me my first recording equipment when I was 12 was Peter Day, who was a cameraman for TVO. And I remember as a kid, I was obsessed with a show on TVO at the time called Inquiring Minds, where kids could write in letters asking scientific questions and the hosts would answer them. I remember one day seeing there was an episode about what happens when you break your bone. And the demonstration was a person falling down, tripping on a Mr. Potato Head and falling down a flight of stairs, breaking their arm. That person was Pete. And I remember being like, oh, like that's Pete. Like, why is he on the TV? And that was the moment I realized, like, no, these are just people doing a job and, going over to, my dad's college buddies' houses and seeing like the trucks that they would take to go broadcast. We had a couple of friends that worked at CTV and they would have to drive the big broadcast truck with all the dishes on it. And, yeah, like just sort of having that demystified at a young age really inspired me to get involved with it because it just showed me like how easy all that stuff is. And when I was, 20, I was the audio engineer on a feature film in Guelph, and yeah, it was the same thing. It was like being behind the scenes on a film set, and like just everybody else is just like you are, and what you see on the screen is so far removed from all the bull crap that went on that day on the shoot or the extraneous circumstances. Like none of that matters when you have the actual thing there.
Right.
And so
You're
yeah,
lucky.
no,
You're lucky to have had an opportunity, I guess, to peek behind that curtain of the shiny veneer of mainstream media. Because I mean that, it still is, but especially in the past, that was like the tone of it that was perpetuated is like this is like a closed system. You cannot like be involved in this. This is passive. You know, like in the line was always like, oh, you can't. We can't show your VHS home recordings because that's not broadcast standard, and that's total nonsense. That was just like a ruse to say like we're not interested in that. Like we're taking care of it, but for sure you can show VHS signals in the '80s on broadcast television. But it was this is the interesting thing about it now is like there's no boundaries between audience and creator, and even as I said before, the technology is the same that we're using. You know, YouTube Live. It's what CBC uses. It's what every place in the world uses now. Um,
Exactly. And that's really that's a big that's a actually a massive part of this whole project with Love Affair too, is this like um we really want to sort of address the barriers of entry to a lot of these things, because as we both mentioned, like it is really pretty simple. Like we're all using the same gear that the professionals are using, um, and it's the barriers of entry are put up by the people who feel that they like earned where like their knowledge, or because they paid for it through school, or because they went through a couple of crappy positions like in network TV or radio or whatever before they got where they are. And it's the same thing, it's the main argument that you see against um, making tuition free. It's like, well, I paid for school, why shouldn't you have to? And and this is what I'm getting at with Love Affairs. Like, how do we share these skills with people? And like, because really all it takes is an interest. If you want to become a musician or like like a producer, nowadays you can open up YouTube and you can learn that stuff pretty quickly. Um, but there's still certain communities that gatekeep, like mastering in audio. Audio mastering is like a big one. When I went to school, I was told like mastering, like you don't touch mastering, you don't do that, you give it to a mastering engineer, and that a mixing engineer and a mastering engineer can never do the same job because they're completely different jobs. The reality of that situation is that people were actually like the people who do mastering, it's an incredibly simple process. It's really just working with headroom and making sure the dynamic range is reasonable, so that you don't hear things too quiet and then too loud and it's not jarring. It's really all you're doing, which involves limiters and compressors, which is like, that's anybody could go buy a brick wall limiter. It's not a hard thing to find. Um, but it's this idea that if you open that technology to people, then that job is no longer required. Um, and mastering is a perfect example of that right now, actually, because of the algorithms that Spotify and SoundCloud and Apple Music and Tidal and all of these groups use different normalization algorithms to make all the music the same volume. So um, the rules that applied for the last 25 years, as far as like mastering in audio go, don't apply anymore. Um, and it's just it's an obsolete school. So
it is an obsolete way of thinking. I kind of wrestle with that a lot here. You know, I'm kind of firmly more in this media art genre. That's all about the individual, versus sort of like the filmmaking idea, which is like a business model that includes a lot of people in very specific roles. And really, I think what technology is shifting people away from being specialists into generalists, but the system doesn't support that. Point in fact, the second episode I did with this, I talked to one of my dearest friends, Nick Dembour, who is an incredible video maker, and he for 2 years was making spots for Conan O'Brien's monologues, and he eventually he lost that position because they could not figure out which union to put him in because he did it all. So he couldn't join all the unions, but he couldn't rightly just join one because he was shooting, doing the music, doing the sound, editing, graphics, everything. And eventually the unions like kicked him off because he wasn't kind of in yesterday's model of how things are created. You know?
exactly.
Yeah.
Robert Dayton touched on this as well with the sort of uh, the polymath. Like, if you have lots of different avenues that you work in, it's really difficult. Not even just to find work in those avenues, but to be taken seriously in any of them. Because like, oh well, if you're a musician, like, how do you have time to make art? Or if you're an artist, how do you have time to make music? And somehow being involved in those things like devalues the other things in people's minds. And I think that there is a lot of value in doing it yourself. And if you want to learn how something works, like, learn how it works. And once you understand it, share that information with people and don't gatekeep it.
Right, right. Well, I really respect, your sort of overriding philosophy of what you're doing with Love Affair Radio in this open and collaborative sense. It takes a lot of trust to do that, to be open to any, contributions or whatnot. And it's really exciting. And like I was saying before, it's like the right way to use the technology, I think, instead of setting up this false armor that traditionally media organizations or outlets have hung on to. So that's fantastic, and also I really want to say thanks so much for supporting Open Circuit and noticing and then kind of embedding it, rebroadcasting it each day. I'd like to just finish off with like two other questions I asked all of my guests. First of all, what have you been thinking about or learned, I guess, in the last 2.5, 3 months since this has come down? I mean, we've talked about what you've done, but what is there anything that you've sort of like learned or any epiphanies you've had?
Um, yeah, I mean, I guess really I've been thinking mostly just about how, how's the world going to look after this. And um, I'm an idealist, so I would like to think that hopefully people come out of this a little disillusioned with capitalism. um, but yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one. I'm Yeah, it's keeping a positive mind during all this is has been, it's an interesting thing and difficult thing to do. I gotta admit, like the mental image of like a billionaire's, on a buffet being eaten is like kind of get me through this a little bit, but that seems to be less of a possibility each day. But I do hope that what we get out as what we get out of this as a people would be that it's our responsibility as a people to look after those who don't have the same support systems that we do, and maybe we should reevaluate the way that we provide those support systems to people that need them. And so I hope that we come out of this a little bit more compassionate, a little bit more appreciative of time and space, and a little bit more uh, self-aware. That would be the ideal, I think.
Well, I agree, and I think we're seeing some glimpses of that. It's not like the disaster movies always predicted that chaos would ensue across society. If things change, I think at least in Guelph and Canada, a lot of places we're seeing a lot of compassion and empathy between people to help each other get through this in ways that we can, and everyone's sort of doing what they can do to contribute as well. So and you are doing that too. And I mean, I think there's a psychological blow to a lot of people in the arts that it's like all of a sudden it's like, what, we're not vital at this moment, but uh, it's a good reckoning, I think, and for people who are creative or have the privilege or ability to do things, is to do what they can, even if it's quiet, even if it's it's not going to solve the problems that science are grappling with or whatnot. People are doing what they can, and you are too. And I really wish you best of luck to grow your projects and just keep making it and keep thinking about it. And maybe when you have your giant media conglomerate, you could hire me to control one little tiny part of it. I'd appreciate that.
You'll be the first hire.
Well, always a pleasure to talk with you, Brian. Nice to catch up as well. I haven't
Yeah,
seen you in a while. And yeah, and thanks again for your support of Open Circuit on Love Affair Radio, loveaffair.info if you want to check it out.
thank you.
Yeah, well,
And if I could quickly, if anybody listening or watching would like to get involved in any capacity, and I mean that very literally, any capacity at all. If you have interest in even just talking with us or doing a show or helping out with the technological side of things or web development, anything at all, you can get in touch with me at Brian, Brian, at loveaffair.info. And I'd love to hear from you. So thanks.
I appreciate that, and I hope some people do, because it's a great thing to be involved with in a way that people can collaborate right now in ways that are still possible and very exciting as well. So thanks, Brian. Can't wait to see you in real life again.
Ditto.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'll see you sometime around Guelph.
You bet.
Yeah, so that was Brian Schirk talking about his life and his projects, and in particular his ideas around loveaffair.info, his latest project to start streaming all sorts of content and ideas during this unusual time. I hope everyone enjoyed the show. Thanks to our viewers. Sean O'Neill's watching, a few others as well. You can always catch these episodes on EdVideo Guelph, one word, YouTube channel in the future. This has been our 23rd episode, and we have many more great ones in the works. Yeah, so join us, please, on this Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, when we have a great guest, also a local artist, Fan Ling Suen, is going to speak about many things of her involvement in her own projects and, like Brian, in collaborative things, as artists seem to often do. And then 1 week from today, we'll be back with Andrew McLuhan talking about what he's doing to preserve and interpret the legacy of his grandfather Marshall McLuhan and his father Eric McLuhan's studies and ideas. Very excited for both of these guests. Thank you so much to Brian Schirk for taking the time to join us today, and to everyone that video supports this show, and at video sponsors, Canada Council for the Arts, Ontario Arts Council, and the City of Guelph. All right, we'll see everybody on Thursday. Take care. Be safe and try to have fun if you can a little bit.